Okay, guys, so you're all very welcome along to this Lgfa Club Leadership Webinar Series webinar. Today we're looking at volunteer burnout and I suppose how to address that. My name is Niall Mulrain. I'm a National Development Officer with the Lgfa, and I'm delighted to have Claire Burke alongside me. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Claire Burke. I'm the Connacht Ladies Games Development Officer. So just working this evening with Niall on this webinar. So delighted to have everyone on board.
Yeah, great stuff, and great to have you along as well, Claire.
Thank you.
I suppose just a bit of housekeeping before we start, guys. If you want to ask a question during the presentation, we've got a Q&A function. You'll see if you run your mouse, I think it's over the bottom of the screen, you'll see a toolbar come up or a taskbar comes up. There's a Q&A function on there, and there's also, if you click on more, I think there'll be a wee chat box will appear there as well. We'll give you opportunities to engage. So we'll ask you questions and we'll ask you, I suppose, for bits of feedback throughout the presentation. It's just about, I suppose, getting involved in that as well. And then if you've anything else, just type it into the chat, and one of us will keep an eye on it if we're not speaking. And then just last thing, guys, if you can't hear us at any stage, just would advise you to log out and log back in again. And hopefully that's about as technical as we can get tonight, but hopefully that'll solve most issues. Just to get started then, we're going to look at, as I said, we're going to look at avoiding volunteer burnout. So I suppose it's something we thought about over the last couple of weeks and months, because our players have got a break, our referees have got a break, but our volunteers and especially our club officers have been working very hard throughout the last number of months. So I think it's a topic that hopefully we'll have a good bit of discussion on tonight. And I might hand over straight away to Claire. Just if you just tell me when you want your slides moved on, Claire.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks a million, Niall. So as Niall said, we're looking at avoiding volunteer burnout. It's important that we as a club and members of a club identify that there may be some volunteers who are feeling, burnt out over the last year. There's a lot of admin to be done in the background. So we're just going to go through that tonight, so you as members of a club can actually identify that and I suppose support these people moving forward. So the learning objectives this evening is to develop an understanding of volunteer burnout, to recognise the symptoms of burnout, to be aware of the symptoms of a volunteer to discuss what the organisation sees, to understand the causes of volunteer burnout, and to discuss solutions or tips to avoid burnout in your volunteers. So just into the chat now, just to get started and get you working with the chat. Can you think of any reasons or like any signs or recognise any symptoms if a volunteer was feeling burnt out within your club? Are there any kind of key things that you think you might see?
Yeah, so I'll keep an eye on the chat for you, if that's
brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, it is like maybe guys, if you've seen it in your own club, if you've maybe recognised in yourself that you're a bit burnt out, what kind of things should you be looking out for? Let's see who comes in here now. With the first one there from Ray. Thank you, Ray. So too few people doing more and more work within the club. So if you've got a smaller and smaller pool of volunteers and they seem to be taking on more and more tasks, I think that's a good one, or that's a good sign to be wary of. Yeah. Deborah's come in with, if they get bored and stop answering questions, or stop responding, or stop doing the things they usually have done. I think that's a good one, isn't it, Claire? We've got from Maria that they're off form, that they're is that dejected or adjected, Maria? Just maybe clarify. And then making mistakes, or maybe what they're doing isn't to the same standard, maybe as they said before. Maybe that's what you're coming from, Maria. I think that's a good point. And then Aoife has come in with anger in responding. So maybe been a bit snappy, or maybe been a bit having a bit of a shorter fuse with people. And then Rosemary has come in with changes to time frames in which people usually deal with stuff. So that's I suppose that's what's coming in the chat there, Claire.
Brilliant, thanks, Niall. So yeah, if we just move on to the next slide, we'll actually have a look at what is volunteer burnout. So there's 4 key stages of volunteer burnout. This is when we can physically see, that the volunteer is physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. And physically, obviously, we'll be able to see that. Mentally, there will be, I suppose, different key factors, like some of you have mentioned there, lack of patience, getting frustrated with things, emotional exhaustion, may even be that they just they just fed up with everything. Obviously, coming with burnout will also come shame for the volunteer. You know, they will have probably been involved with your club for a long time, and they'll probably feel a sense of shame that they don't really want to be there anymore, that they've had enough. And they'll also doubt themselves and what they're doing and their ability to do it correctly within your club. And with that comes cynicism. So, you know, they're very, I suppose, uh, you know, they're I can't think of the words, like skeptical of other people. And when other people come in with new ideas or fresh ideas, they'll probably have sat there and go, you know, I've heard all this before. Lots of people come in and then they come and go, and I'm still the kind of the person left doing the work. So I suppose they begin to doubt other people's intentions as well. And then again, callousness. So then they can have a kind of a cruel disregard for other people when they do come up with ideas, because they're just so used to being the one left to carry the can. You know, as well, when they're burnt out, they feel a sense of failure and helplessness, and that's probably when then they feel they're in a crisis, because they've been that volunteer for so long, but obviously they've just hit the wall. And this is really what us as club members need to recognize for our volunteers, and obviously it'll come in different stages.
Yeah.
So
Just before you move on there, like I sort of break that even down further in their own clubs. Like it's what people were talking about in the chat, wasn't it? Even there, that you see people getting the fuse gets a bit shorter, and maybe the responses are a bit angrier or they're a bit emotional. You know, taking things personally. Maybe even that physical, being tired and being mentally fatigued as well. And like that's the ones you would always see, wouldn't it be? That'd be the ones you'd notice more than the others, probably. But even the cynicism and the callousness, like that could even come into, you know, if you notice anyone having like a negative attitude to things, where maybe before they were positive about what you could achieve or what you could do, and that's probably what you're getting at there as well, isn't it?
yeah.
We'll move on here then, Fee.
Yeah. So like we need to remember that like volunteer is just like work related burnout, only that, you know, as a volunteer you're not getting paid to barrel through, you know, all of the work that you're doing. You're doing it for the love of the sport, the love of your community, but then it just gets to the stage where you feel like maybe you're not being supported enough, or you know, you've just had enough. So burnout is when our most committed and passionate volunteers have just had enough. And again, I suppose the key thing here is for us to identify when that is actually happening, so that hopefully you can try and prevent it or support that person through it so that you don't lose them. So we just have a quiz for you here, and what we'd like you to do is have a look at the answers and check off or write into the chat which numbers you think might apply to some of the volunteers. So what are the signs you need to watch for when you have a volunteer that you feel maybe in jeopardy of becoming burnt out? So which of these following signs maybe have you seen from some volunteers in your own club or people you know who are volunteers in clubs? So it could be number one, volunteers, they lose their enthusiasm for the mission of the club. Number two, the volunteers find criticism in small things and lots of complaints. You know, they could be hearing lots of people coming in, promising the world and then not delivering. So they become more critical of these newer volunteers that are coming on board. It could be volunteers tell others that they worry about their volunteer job even when they're not there. So they're taking on too much. You know, they're I suppose taking the fun out of it in the fact that they're actually saying they're worrying about it too much. You know, it's meant to be a volunteer role. It's meant to be something you enjoy doing. And volunteers act uninspired when they are actually there. So they're there because they have been there forever, but they actually maybe don't want to be there. And volunteers are cranky with other volunteers, players, and club members. Volunteers, number 6, are not showing up or calling in to cancel. So they're kind of letting you down, but it's not because they really want to let you down, but they could just be fed up. And that could be something simple, you know, like a phone call that you could actually then find out. And number 7, volunteers complain that it is no longer fun to be there. So just be interested if you've noticed any of these, or, you know, you might actually be experiencing them yourselves. Like, you know, as a volunteer, definitely a committee member where there's an awful lot of work involved and has been over the last 18 months with COVID related extra pressures on top of people. So Deborah, you've come in with 1, 4, and 6. So, I mean, once you see, and Ray, you've come in 1, 3, 5, and 7. Once you start seeing more than one of these, I think really you need to start kind of like considering why are we seeing these signs from our volunteers? And then I suppose the next thing will be is you'll be thinking about, what can I do to help, or what can I do to support? So Antoinette, again, 1, 4, and 6. So yeah, these are really key signs for us, Maria, over the years. So I'm unsure.
See there, Claire, Aoife and Maria come in a bit earlier just with all of them. They've seen all of them over the years.
I'm not sure what the over the years, all of the above numbers. Yeah. So yeah, at different stages, I suppose, Maria, you might feel like you're in a different number depending on the year and depending on what's going on and depending on how many other volunteers, I suppose, there is to support your role within the club. So what we're going to look at in a little while is kind of some strategies, I suppose, to support these people in the club to try and prevent this from festering and then them leaving your club, which is what you don't want to happen. Do you have anything you want to add there, Niall?
No, I think it's interesting just to see, that some people are seeing a lot of these things, and like probably if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably seen some of the signs in yourself, because it does a bit of it, does come with the territory of being a volunteer. Sometimes you do lose the enthusiasm. Sometimes, you do be criticizing things. And I know, like myself and yourself are both volunteers in our clubs, and like you're probably used to that as well. But it's just when you see a number of them, isn't it? And seeing a number of them together, it's when you just need to be mindful that somebody might be a bit burnt out or fatigued, isn't that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Right, I'll move on here for a few, Claire.
Great. So in terms of what does the volunteer feel who is getting burnt out? So obviously, they've obviously volunteered for a while. They're beginning to feel tired, fatigued, stressed, because maybe they've got too much. Maybe they're being overloaded with lots of work within the club. They may have signed up to support, and all of a sudden they've been left carrying the can or carrying the full thing themselves. They may then begin to feel resentful and at wit's end, like, why have I been left this task? Why is there not other people who can come and support? Their volunteer work is no longer fulfilling, so they disengage. They just no longer enjoy it, and especially if it's overwhelming and there's too much, and then they just think, what, I'm just not going to answer that phone, I'm not going to answer that email. They start to make excuses, often health related, for not attending to responsibilities. So obviously, nobody's going to question if you say there's a reason, health reason, you can't be somewhere, but they feel it's probably the easiest way, instead of just saying, I need other people to support me to come on board here. And they feel taken advantage of. And I think this is really key. Too much work and too few volunteers to do it. Where are the others? And, like that happens in lots of clubs where you see the same coaches year in, year out, or, not just coaches, but you see the same club members year in, year out. And there is new people joining the clubs all the time, but they're not prepared to take on any work or support the people that are there already. The volunteers keep saying yes because they want to support their club and they want things to progress and carry on, but they don't actually want to say yes. They want other people to come in and say, we will take some of the workload from you. But unfortunately, that's not happening for one reason or another. So it's really important that you within your club can identify this and think about, can I spot these signs and symptoms within some of the members, and what can we do to actually support them? So what does the club see? So the club is at the other end. The club sees the end result of burnout being translated in the following ways. And so they think, volunteers are not showing up, work's not getting done, so someone does more to catch up. So I suppose when one volunteer suffers burnout, it actually then creates even more work for another volunteer, which obviously then it can have like a ripple effect because someone else has more work to catch up on. So then they're being put under pressure as well. Volunteers say yes to us without the enthusiasm. So you have people there who just do not want to be there. And there's nothing worse than being in an environment with people where they just want it over with. They want it done and dusted. They get cranky. You can see it in their attitude when they're in a situation where they just want to turn up, do what they have to do and get out of there. The culture of the club shifts to one of stress. So like dissatisfaction, complaining, you know, they're thinking, oh, why don't this team go now? Why are they still hanging around? You know, get these girls off the pitch. It's 7:05. You know, there's no fun left. There's no banter, say, between maybe the coaches and the volunteers, because the volunteers have just had enough. So it's all work and no play. They turn up, they do what they have to do, and then they get out of there. So like they feel it's like a mission for them, and that goals are not being reached anymore. They don't really have the same, I suppose, feelings of reaching milestones or goals within their club. Their membership or their services decline or are modified or cancelled. So obviously, if it's not identified that things are not going well for this volunteer, then obviously they decide then, you know, I'm going to pull back on my membership, or I'm just going to cancel and get out of this situation altogether. And then increasingly more difficult to recruit new volunteers and or retain the ones that are there. You know, how do you keep recruiting new volunteers when the ones that you have are leaving? What does it say to new people in your club? Well, we can't keep our volunteers because we're not, maybe, you know, we're not recognizing the actual work that they're doing. So will it really make new people want to join your club? And that's what, as a club, people need to start thinking about overall, because otherwise you'll find as the years go on, you'll just have a decline in volunteers and your club can't run. You know, you can have loads of players and loads of coaches, but you need the volunteers to do all of the other work. And there's massive amounts of work in clubs that need to be done outside of teams and coaching. Niall, oh, okay. So this is just a quiz. We just want to have an idea. What are the causes of volunteer burnout? So if you can just check off which ones you believe are the causes of burnout. So there's 8 of them here altogether. So we ask other busy volunteers to do more using the mantra, if you want work done, ask a busy person. So like, I suppose it's like that person's always there. They're always doing something. Let's just ask them because we know they'll do it. But we're not actually asking them, you know, have you too much to do? Maybe we need to get more people to help you. We don't have a recruitment plan. We just keep using the existing volunteers because they are loyal and committed. And that's, I suppose, happens in a lots of clubs. You know, you have volunteers who've been there 20, 30 years, and you know, we consider them to be loyal and committed, but they could actually feel like they have to be there because there's no one coming behind them, which is wrong. And there should be more people coming on board to support them and find out what role they're doing, so in the future they can actually then take up them roles and give the volunteers that are in the roles a break. No one is keeping their eye tuned to volunteer unpaid staff management. So again, like as we said, volunteers aren't paid. They're there because they enjoy, well, in the beginning, they enjoy being there. They are unpaid. So, you know, they are unpaid for an awful lot of work. So they need to really recognize that and make sure that, you know, it's been managed correctly and that not one person has been overloaded with all of the work. We don't set clear expectations for the roles, so we don't have a written position. So, you know, you could start off volunteering saying, yeah, I'm going to help put out the flags on match day. And then it could end up that you're doing the lines. And then it could end up that you're, you know, you become the vice secretary because you're at a meeting and they just ask you to do it and you say, okay. And then next thing you become the secretary, but you know, your PRO mightn't know the role very well. So you have to support. So you end up doing multiple jobs within the club. And in actual fact, you could be doing all of them, but not very well, rather than doing one very well. So that's where, again, people will, you know, suffer burnout because they just think, I can't cope with everything. We don't have an understanding or a policy that allows volunteers to say no and be respected for saying no. So like, I know when we run club blitzes and things like that, you know, it's kind of expected that everybody will be there. You know, if someone says, no, I'm not going to be there, like, it's an expectation that we expect a reason. We don't just expect a no. Whereas sometimes it can be important to say, we don't expect everybody to be there for every single blitz. You know, we can share the workload. We don't have a recognition strategy. And I think this is something that, Niall, you've done lots of different webinars on. You know, it's really important with volunteers, when you're working with them, that you have a recognition strategy. So it could be that you know, give them a gift voucher at the end of the year, or that you know, some clubs do awards, or some clubs give them free kit. But that you recognize that, you know, your club secretary, your club PRO, all of these people, without them, your club wouldn't be in the position it's in. So usually it's kind of the manager or the coach or whoever would get the club kit, but it's important that the committee are treated exactly the same way, or the management. And we don't plan well. We keep work practical and well executed. So, again, we don't plan right. So what we're gonna, say our PRO, there mightn't be like a plan in terms of how they're actually gonna lay out how they're promoting the club. And again, something like that would actually make the role of the PRO a lot more simpler, and they would have a better understanding. Whereas they feel like they just get stuff thrown at them and expected to, I suppose, deliver at the drop of a hat. And in terms of this quiz, check off what you believe are the causes of burnout. All of these are actually causes of burnout, depending on the role depending on the role the volunteer takes up, or the copious amount of roles that they end up having by the time they've been in the club 5 or 10 years. Which I think, Niall, you'll agree, you sign up for one thing and next thing you're on another committee and you're on another something else, and it just spirals.
Yeah, well, I think I said to you in a previous webinar, maybe Claire, we discussed it at one point, that my first role with my own club, I went down to, I was told I was coming down to have a vote on the players getting a physio, and I walked out of the meeting as the children's officer. So that is usually the way it happened, and it's probably the way it happened for too long, and it's probably not the way it should happen at all. So, like, I think you've made some great points there. We might ask maybe if anyone, I think if you click on your own name, you might be able to raise your hand, guys. And if anyone wants to, we'll unmute you. And if you'd like to maybe give us your own thoughts on what you think is the biggest cause of volunteer burnout there. I suppose myself and Claire would have our own thoughts, and there's maybe a couple that are really prevalent in our games. And maybe if somebody wants to put up their hand there, we'll unmute you, and if not, don't worry about it, but even if somebody wants to write into the chat what they think the biggest cause is. But I think you've when you're doing that, guys, or when you're putting your hands up, hopefully, I think you're right there, Claire, in saying especially that recognition thing. It's I think it was Sport England did a study where they found it was 3 times more expensive to get to, in terms of your time and your effort and your energy, to train a new volunteer than it was to keep a good volunteer. And like the retaining, or the retention and recognition is probably the thing we do really poorly as a people, and like it's a very simple thing to do. As you said, it could be the gear, it could be, we thank you at the end of the year. Sometimes it can be a thanks. Sometimes it can be just saying thank you and you're appreciated and letting people know that. It could be, a Christmas card at the end of the year from the club saying, look, thanks, we appreciate your efforts. It can be, a text or an email, or a letter from the chairperson saying, look, we do understand what you're doing, and we really appreciate it. And that can be the difference. I find sometimes in, a volunteer deciding I'll give it another year, or deciding, no, that's it, that's enough for me. And like, I think there, Maria has put in a point into the chat where, parents working not enough time. Yeah, people are busier these days, and I think maybe clubs haven't moved with that, and maybe there's still the expectation that, I suppose you always hear that about the people that are at the pitch 7 nights a week, and unfortunately that's not for everyone nowadays. People don't have the time, and it's really what people choose to commit their time to these days. And you want to give, the way I look at it, at volunteering, I suppose, is you're empowering people, and by empowering people, you're removing all barriers to success. You're removing everything that could maybe make them fail. And that's about giving people, as you said there, Claire, their role expectations, their role descriptions, exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Having your policies in place, having your, people to fall back on, having supports there. And if someone doesn't have enough time, well, that's okay, because the person that gives the 7 hours or the 7 days a week at the pitch, and the person that gives 1 hour a year, they're both valued, and they're both, and I suppose as a club, it's your job to make them feel valued, And then we have another one there, people not even understanding what needs to be done in the background. And I think, yeah, that is, people can get very frustrated, because maybe the rest of the club or the rest of the community don't understand the amount of work that a secretary does, or a treasurer does, or a PRO does, because they're full-time, they're nearly full-time occupations at this stage, and there's a lot of effort and energy and commitment given to those roles. So there is a wee bit of maybe frustration about people not understanding what you're doing. Even I know, Claire, we were discussing before the webinar started, you know, even about getting involved in coaching, and I suppose we're involved in coaching in our clubs, and like, you know, it is the thing where maybe players or parents or whoever are rocking up and they're coming to training and they're going away for that hour. But you have to remember the coaches are probably there half an hour earlier. They're probably doing a bit of work during the day, planning the session, and then they're staying behind to make sure everyone gets home and make sure the whole thing is cleaned up. So there probably is that wee bit of maybe not understanding about what happens, you know, in the background to make sure the stuff on the pitch happens. And then we've one from Deborah there as well saying, the parents that aren't involved in the club, they expect their daughters to be dropped to every away game and never help out at all. And I suppose the thing there is, I suppose we're getting away from volunteer burnout there, and that's about, I suppose, getting people involved in the club. And we do have a webinar about, I suppose, recruitment of volunteers, and like there's a number of different ways. I suppose we'll not get into it tonight, but there is a number of ways you could go about, you know, approaching those parents or trying to win them on side or trying to get them involved. But I think we'll maybe stay away from that tonight, because that's a whole separate conversation. But I do take the point that it can be frustrating as a volunteer when you see, I suppose, people not helping out or people not getting involved. And the way someone explained that to me one time by saying, you're getting annoyed because, you know, because people aren't given the same effort as yourself or aren't given the same level of commitment as yourself. And I suppose the thing about volunteering is you can't make people do it, you know, and that's like, you can't force people to do it. So it's just, I suppose there has to be a wee bit of a nearly understanding from a volunteer's point of view that, you know, people mightn't give as much effort as yourself, and not to get too annoyed about it. But at the same time, the club does have a responsibility to make sure everyone that is, you know, helping out or working for the club are being respected and recognized, and, you know, that kind of thing as well. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Deborah's comment, and I think, like, probably the way I've picked it up is that, you know, volunteers can get burnt out because obviously there isn't parents getting involved. But then we have to, as you said, look at the flip side of the coin. There's lots of other reasons why they might be not getting involved. And from Maria's point, people not having an understanding of what needs to be done, therefore they're not volunteering because they don't actually know what the roles are that they could help with. And I think if that is something that's key, if we could get clubs to actually get members to understand the different roles there are to volunteer in, it probably would mean that the same volunteers wouldn't have to be used every year, or they'd have a lot more support. So I think, yes, it does. These implications of people not being aware would actually then, they don't get involved, so therefore the volunteers that have been there can't leave because there's no one coming up, and this is why they then suffer burnout. So I suppose one thing affects another thing. Is there a generic template available with all roles and responsibilities? Yeah, so there is a booklet, and that's online, Niall, as well, isn't it?
That's available. I'm not sure about the GA, but from ourselves, we have the guidelines for club officers. We also have one for county officers, and that is available on the Lgfa website. So if you look up, just go onto the Lgfa website and you look up role descriptions. If you go into a thing called the hub, the Lgfa hub, and you click on club, you'll find the guidelines for club officers there. Or if you just stick in the search bar, guidelines for club officers, I'm sure if you went on to ga.ie as well, there would be a section, and I think they do have a very good section on the GA, on the e-learning portal, for every role in the GA as well. But for ourselves, head onto the website and look up the guidelines for club officers. And I think you make a very good point there, Claire, you know, about making sure everyone knows, you know, their roles and understands what roles are available to them, because it can be a bit of a two-way street, where I find in a lot of clubs, you know, you have a lot of people maybe or small number of people doing a lot of work, and they're sort of sitting there going, well, no, why is no one helping us? And it can be very, very frustrating. And I'm sure we've all been in that situation where you looked around and you said, well, it's the same people, you know, it's the same faces all the time. But you probably, and this is like, I'm being a bit generic maybe here, but you can probably, in every community, in every town, there's probably the same number of people waiting to be asked. And that's the thing about volunteering. You know, people very rarely put their hand up and put their head above water to say, look, I'll step in here. They have to be approached. And I think we're in a bit of a, you know, it has its advantages for ourselves in the association and the wider Gaelic games, that, you know, volunteers in other maybe sectors or other sports, you know, come and go. But usually when we get volunteers, they're there for life, and you know, they're there for a long time. And that's where the burnout can come in. And it's, I suppose, it's not as simple as just going, right, every year we'll have a new committee and we'll have new people, because it doesn't always work. And sometimes you are, you know, somebody is in a role for a long time, and, you know, the burnout can happen then, and it can get very frustrated. And if you have somebody, you know, in a position, and they're not really giving their full commitment to it, that's where you end up with problems. So, like, I suppose the advice that, and we'll look at solutions here in a wee second, but the advice to that would be that, you know, you keep refreshing. You know, you have one or two new faces every year, and hopefully, you know, a bit of mentoring and a bit of learning and a bit of, you know, making sure they know what happens and what needs to happen if and when, you know, the people in the role decide to step away or want a wee break. And that's how you can overcome it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
We'll move on to the next one.
you're happy enough if I take it from here then, Claire, if you're...
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, no bother. So we'll look, guys. Now, we talked about it a wee bit there, about, I suppose, the solutions and how to get around, you know, and how to maybe combat the volunteer burnout. But I might do, well, we'll not actually keep it. I do a wee poll, but I was going to say, you know, probably from the last, you know, 20 minutes discussion, you'd probably figured out. I know myself, and I suppose me and Claire spoke about this earlier. You can probably see signs of burnout in yourself, and maybe, you know, everyone here, I've no doubt everyone that's on the call tonight is, you know, highly committed to their own clubs and probably doing, you know, a mountain of work, as they talk about. So, you know, you probably see those wee maybe signs of a bit of burnout yourself. And over the last, you know, year and a half, our volunteers and our committee members have probably been our hardest working people. So there's no doubt, you know, and it's been I suppose, a stressful time for everyone involved, because not only was our games, you know, not allowed to be played, but you also have to run the club and make sure it's there when the games start again. So I can understand if anyone saw any signs of that themselves. But over the next couple of slides, we're going to look at, I suppose, tips on how to avoid burnout and maybe how to combat it. So the first thing we would say is develop a recruitment process. You know, recruitment in terms of volunteering in Lgfa clubs is I think it's very organic. I would nearly call it parochial. It's you know, it just happens, and sometimes, hopefully, somebody will turn up at the AGM. Hopefully, somebody will be there, and hopefully they'll take on the role, and hopefully they won't say no. So what I would say is, you know, develop a recruitment process. We have a recruitment and retention webinar we do, and it, you know, if we don't mind your saying, it is very good and it's very useful. And we also have a toolbox on the website. It's called the Lgfa Volunteer Recruitment Retention Toolbox, and it's about, I would say it's about 150 pages long, and it's full of great information on how to, I suppose, recruit volunteers and how to set up your structures so that, I suppose, you get the best out of everyone that wants to help. One of the things, if I was going to give you one tip in terms of a recruitment process, is I would assign somebody within the committee that's going to look after it, you know, because recruitment of volunteers and getting people involved is kind of this thing that we leave up to everyone, and then we leave it to no one. So we do have a role there, and there's a role description available in that toolkit, and it's called the volunteer coordinator. And I would advise every club to appoint a volunteer coordinator, and their role, I suppose, is to scope out and to approach people and to figure out, you know, and induct people into the club. So that could be your first step in developing a volunteer recruitment process. You know, create better volunteer positions. So you can see there, you know, make sure volunteer role descriptions are realistic and clear. We did a bit of a survey a number of years ago on our volunteers and on our members, and the big thing that came out of it from a volunteer's point of view was they wanted clear role descriptions. So that's one thing we're hearing time and time again. People want to know exactly what they should be doing, what the time commitment are, what the expectations, what the responsibilities are. I think we're probably at a stage, and it's just, I suppose, organic, from the organic nature of it. Again, you're probably where whoever's in the role at the minute probably was, you know, told how to do the role by the person before them, and they were told by the person before them, and they heard it from someone else. And, you know, maybe the role you're actually doing, you know, it could be far enough removed from what the role actually is. So, you know, I would set about, you know, find out the role descriptions. They're all there on the website, and communicate them to your officers, communicate them to anyone you want to do a role. The big thing there is, you know, allow people to say no. You know, it can be a thing where you're massively shocked. if somebody says, well, no, I don't want to do that. But you have to remember, like, everyone in the association in a club is a volunteer. So like the very nature of volunteering is they can choose to do it or not. And if somebody once said to me, you know, in terms of volunteering, if somebody wants to do something for you, they will, and if they don't, they won't. And there's very little you can do to change their mind. But the key to it is making them want to do it. So, but being aware that if they do say no, well, that's okay. You have a backup. So have a backup plan in place. Have your assistants. Have your, you know, if your secretary, if your treasurer decides, well, look, I need to step away for a year, we'll have the vice treasurer or the assistant secretary there ready to step in and you know that they have to step in or they should be stepping in if somebody steps back. Revisit, you know, what people are doing and make sure roles aren't boring, because, you know, anyone that's in a role for a number of years, you can get a bit, I don't want to say bored, but fatigue's maybe the right word for that. And then, you know, maybe change it up a wee bit. Maybe, you know, if you have somebody who's a really good volunteer and they're just maybe not getting excited by a certain role anymore, you know, chat to them and see, well, would there be something else you'd like to do, you know, and get them doing that for a while. And then if there's some roles that are a bit redundant that maybe, you know, that are needed for 1 week a year, is there any way you can eliminate them and find a better way of doing things so people, I suppose, aren't feeling that they're not fulfilling the thing either, you know? And then match volunteer skills to roles for better long-term satisfaction of volunteers. And that's something we would say, you know, a lot is usually it's just whoever's there and whoever puts the hand up. But I would spend a bit of time figuring out, right, well, this is, you know, John or Mary's skills and this is what they're good at. So this is the role we'll say, you know, would you be interested in taking on, instead of, oh, sure, look, we need this position filled, you know, and they mightn't be any good at it at all. And that's where the thing can fail, you know. Having better project management as well. So if there is, you know, I always think about this as if there's a fundraiser, or if there's, you know, if there's some kind of a job of work to be done, and it could be even, you know, a pitch cleanup, and being better organized is basically, you know, that it's a review what you're trying to do, and make sure you have the right number of people. So I know maybe when you're doing a cleanup before the start of the season, which people will be doing, you know, before we get back to training and things like that there in the 26 counties and probably has already happened in the 6 counties, you know, figure out how many people do you need. And so there's not too few or too many, because having too many and people standing with their hands in their pockets and having too few and a mountain of work to do can be as bad as each other, you know, and have the right volunteers and the right skills and the right experience needed to do it and to do it well. And as I said, there are too many volunteers causes discontent, and too few leads to burnout. So if you've got a big fundraiser you're thinking of and you're leaving it in the hands of 1 or 2 people, they can get burnt out. They can get, you know, they'll get sick of it pretty quickly. But at the same time, if you leave it to 15 people, well, it's the too many cooks thing, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. There can be too many people involved sometimes, and then people don't know what roles they have, and it becomes all up in the place, and then people get very frustrated over it as well. Yeah, definitely.
The next thing then, I suppose, better planning, better resource development. You know, plan out your year, plan out, and I know this is a bit, I suppose it's a bit, you know, we're getting a bit big here, but plan out, you know, what tasks need to be done throughout the year. We know, you know, registration comes up at a certain time. We know that we're going to get a big cleanup. We know we're going to do fundraisers this time of the year, so plan it out. And, you know, if you did something the previous year and it worked well, like I know, I'm thinking from my own experience, you know, we did a big breakfast as a registration morning and it worked really, really well. So the big breakfast became, you know, a yearly event. And then we had a wee folder that you could hand off to somebody and say, there's how the big breakfast works, or this is how this works. And, you know, there's probably those kinds of wee things happen all over, you know, in every club. And it's just if you wrote down even, well, here's how this works, here's how this happens, and then it's there for anyone who wants to.
Well, I think, Niall, in that sense, isn't it, like one year could be great and planned extremely well, but then if the people don't write it down, like you say, the next kind of group coming in don't know what went well and what shouldn't be done, and they have to go and learn the hard way themselves again. So obviously, you would just eliminate those issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're right. And then number 5 there, interchange responsibilities. So, you know, as I say, we're blessed in the association, and it's a great advantage that people give lifelong commitment. And you often, I'm sure we know somebody in every club that's a lifelong, you know, member, and they've been involved since the club started in most cases, you know, and sometimes that can lead to burnout, and sometimes they might need to be re-energized. You know, they might need to take a step away from, you know, being the secretary or being the chairperson or being the treasurer, and give them another wee, be the assistant for a year, be the, do the gate, do this, give them a wee role where they can recharge their batteries and come back re-energized the next year, and as I say, maybe make sure they have the skill as well to do that, because it is about matching the right people to the skill. There's no point, I suppose, having a great secretary and then deciding, right, you've done that for 5 years, would you be the treasurer now? And they mightn't have any, they mightn't have the skills to be the treasurer. So I would say, if someone is the top table, as they talk about, the chairperson, secretary, treasurer, PRO, if somebody's in one of those roles and they're doing the role for 3 5 years, 3 years, I would say, it's probably a good time to change anyone. And I know people do stay on for longer, but if you had maybe not a rule, but maybe you had an unwritten rule in the club, well, look, if anyone's in one of them roles, then let them come back and be part of the committee, but don't put the pressure of taking on, just have a merry-go-round at the top table and have the secretary becoming the chairperson and the chairperson becoming the treasurer. Give them that chance to switch off, give them the chance to step away and be involved in the club. And you never know, in 3 years' time, in 4 years' time, in 2 years' time, they might decide, well, I want to step back in and I want to get involved again. And then instead of having someone who has been doing the role for 9 years and is just sick to the teeth of it, you have someone who's taken a break and they're back again and they're doing the role well again. And as it can make for a better trained, more cohesive, group, and have less people throwing the head up and deciding that they're done for good with the club. Number 6, then, communicate better. And like, this probably should be number 1. I think it's if there's one thing you can do to make your club a better place, is talk to each other and communicate more, and make sure every volunteer, make sure every, if you're in a leading position in a club, or if you're one of the leaders in a club, that you're knowing everyone that helps out. And I can find, like, even just knowing people by name, can make a massive difference to somebody. And it's something, I suppose, we would say to coaches, isn't it, Claire, that, the least you can do is learn everyone's name, get to know the people you're working alongside, get to know the people, that are helping out alongside you. And I suppose by knowing people, you can figure out, if they're getting a wee bit burnt out, or if they're getting a wee bit tired or fatigued, And that's the thing. If volunteers know you're approachable and invested in them, and you care, they're more likely to say, look, I'm a bit, I'm a bit tired here, or need a wee bit of a break, But the communication thing as well, like, that goes back to letting people know exactly what's expected of them, having role descriptions, knowing, I suppose, how much effort and commitment in these things are involved. If you get the communication right within a club, everything else sort of flows into it. The next one there, I suppose, recognizing, and I know we spoke about that, so I'll not go into too much of it there, but recognizing volunteers is something that, I don't think at club level we do that well, and it's probably nearly an expectation. The more you do, the more you'll be asked to do, is the thing people say, isn't it? So recognizing volunteers and saying, thank you, and sometimes all it is just a thank you. And I know people go into, I suppose, gear and big and thank you nights, and that kind of thing, vouchers and that kind of thing. But nobody does it for that. Nobody gets involved in the association for personal gain like that. So, a thank you it's the least you should be saying to volunteers after a year. All your coaches, all your committee members, everyone that done a gate, that, as you said, Claire, that lined the pitch, that put out the flags, they should be getting a thank you from you at the end of the year. Like, it's the least, it is the least you could do. And then number 8, volunteers have rights. So make sure they're respected, make sure they understand, that they are to be treated fairly, and no one's there to be abused. And like, I know we mentioned in the chat there about making mistakes. Nobody goes out to make a mistake, and especially when they're given their time and effort and energy, nobody wants to make a mistake. And if mistakes are made, they're not there to be abused. There's nothing you can't come back from, as they say. So if a mistake is made, I suppose it's just about learning from that, and I suppose moving on as a club. But I suppose nobody's there to be abused, and people want to be treated fairly. And I suppose, if there is, I've seen it on pitches, for underage games, that nobody's here. Nobody, it's not the Iron final. Nobody wants to be shouted at, that kind of thing. I thought that's really, really good in terms of underage players. But if you wanted to develop a list, for your, like a code of conduct for your volunteers, and say, well, look, here's how the club will treat you. I know we have a volunteer charter on our website as well, and it's very, very good. I suppose it's the rights and responsibilities of the volunteer, the rights and responsibilities of the club, and have that somewhere where people can see it, and let people know, that they can say no, that they can take the break, that they don't have to spend the 7 days a week at the pitch, I suppose we're going to look at a couple of case studies here, and this will be the last thing we'll do this evening. And the first one is John. And John was a found member of the club. He's totally committed to keeping the club on track. He attends every function. He sits in the committee. He helps out with training, games, and he does the gate if needed. So John's the 7-day-a-week man. Okay, he's there every day. He's doing something. So he can be called upon whenever an extra hand or an extra head is needed. He never says no. However, many people have noticed that he's aging, and maybe the standard, is not up to what it was. Also, his partner's been ill lately, but John keeps coming out. And I suppose, given what we talked about today, what would you do there? And maybe we'll put it into the chat, or if somebody would like to maybe put their hand up, we'll allow you to talk there. I think there is, if you go onto your name, you can click raise your hand. There we've got, who was that?
Patrick Murray.
Patrick, I'll bring you in here, Patrick. What would you do in that situation?
Take a few rolls away from money. Would that be the start of this day? Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose what would the benefit of that be, Patrick?
Well, if he's aging and he's under pressure, he might get energized with his less rolls to do. I would think in there, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and probably like I know it's not easy, but like if you have people dubbing job, like it might be in your own club. If you
somebody else could step in and give him a hand as well, yeah.
That'll be the thing, if you have people that are doing 2 or 3 different roles within the club, no matter how committed you are, you'll probably get sick of something. You'll probably get annoyed about something, So I think you're right there. Look at what he's doing and say, look, well, maybe
3 or 4. He's probably 3 or 4 roles there if you look at it there, yeah.
And you'd probably take him. You'd probably give him. Even if you could cut it down to 1 role, and say
1 or 2 maybe, yeah.
The thing would like you.
Well, if he's able to do 4, he might be able to do 2, and maybe able to just do 1 maybe. Definitely not all the roles he has anyway. And he probably needs to spend more time at home as well, maybe with his partner there as well. So
that's a great point, because people do have lives, and that's and
that too, yeah.
I know you think when you're involved in the club, like I suppose people might think you've nothing else to be at, but
well, his family as well. People for families as well. Yes, I suppose I think that too, yeah.
Yeah, some great points. So thank you for that, Patrick. Claire,
no problem.
You have anything to add on that one?
No, I think you've covered it all there, really. Yeah, definitely, on all the points that Patrick came up with.
Yeah. So if anyone, I think Aoife has put into the chat there, have other people help him. And again, like I suppose I know I said it there to Patrick, but I suppose the biggest issue probably here is John has he has things going on at home, and he has things, and that can play in people's minds. But I would say a bigger issue, and it's probably for the club, is that he's doing several different things, and maybe while he might have several different roles, and like it's back to the thing of people putting their hands up and waiting for people to come to the AGM. I think to be forward thinking, the days of people double jobbing probably are, you want people to focus on one thing, and if they're good at that one thing, let them at it instead of burdening them with more and more. And it's back to that thing, ask if you want something done, ask a busy man. But sometimes you can burden them a bit. So the things, I suppose, the advice there would, give John the opportunity to, step away only if he wants. Being a volunteer, when he has the busy stuff at home, being a volunteer could be the escape. It could be the thing that, gets him through, all the things that are going on in his life. They're saying there, take him for a coffee and have an honest talk, having a chat with people, and you want it to come from the volunteer to say, well, look, I'd like to take a step back. So having that chat with him, I think, we've put in here help him balance his life, but like, I don't know if I'd be going down that road first off, focus on what skills he has and ask him to do just those jobs. So what is he good at? What does he like doing the most, I would say, and ask him, maybe you want to focus on that. Consider, like, this is the club's responsibility, I suppose, consider asking him not to do as much if he wants to ease out of roles, but he's doing them as well because the club's letting him do them as well. So maybe have the chat and say, look, we're gonna maybe ask if somebody can help you, like you said, Patrick. Talk to other senior volunteers within the club, and that could be your officers, and say, look, could you give John a bit of a break? If you get a committee to help recruit helpers and ticket sellers and things like that there, so he has that bit of help. So you mentioned that as well, John. And then if John is a senior figure in the club, if he's a founding member, say, well, look, John, would you be interested in being a mentor? Would you be interested in helping the next generation of volunteers? coming through, and you know, you have a great experience here, and you've done a lot of things in your time in the club. Would that could be a new role for John? You know, that he's passing on, I suppose, the knowledge he learned there as well. We have another case study here, and this is Mary, and you know, Mary has been a very active volunteer for 6 years, so been involved for quite a while as well. She's the assistant registrar and often helps out on social nights. So if there's any kind of nights that the club's running, Mary's there. For the past few months, other volunteers have noticed a change in her attitude. Once positive, she's very negative and finds, you know, she's complaining about a lot. She even complains to, you know, on social nights, people that are attending when they arrive. And several other volunteers are refusing to help out at the same time as her because they've noticed this change in her attitude. And she recently called in sick several times, and yesterday there was a major club event and she showed up late. If you're responsible for, you know, this volunteer, what might you do? So again, if somebody would like to put up their hand, we'll give you, I don't know if, is that you again, Patrick, or maybe you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll allow you to chat there. Patrick, what would you do this time? There you are now, you're in now. You
need to unmute there, Patrick.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
She seems to be under pressure there. Stress. Well, she's probably stressed. Anyway, that's one thing I'd say. Anyway, yeah. She's called in sick, and she's probably too long on the job as well, I would say. Yeah. She needs a change. Yeah.
I think you're right there again. You know, if somebody's been doing this, you know, if we've been doing any role, and like again, I'm well aware that, you know, clubs are crying out for volunteers, and it's not always as easy as saying, you know, oh, she will just get a new one. But if you have somebody that's in the role that long, you know, it's only natural you get a bit. No, I don't want to say sick of doing it, because nobody, you know, they're still there, so they're still doing it. But you get a bit tired, you get a bit fatigued, you can be a bit more easily annoyed by doing it. So I do think, you know, 3 years, you know, if you get somebody to commit to 3 years, it's a long time.
Long time, yeah.
You know, after that, you probably need to be thinking of freshening the thing up. And if there was another role she liked to do, you could maybe move her into that. So what would you do? How would you deal with this one, Patrick?
Well, you probably have to have a chat with her as well, I would think, yeah. And then maybe the same as before, just give. She might need help as well, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. And I suppose we've got another slide here. I'll just mute you again, Patrick, a wee second, and we'll look at I suppose what the suggestions here are, and maybe you might agree with them and you might not. We've got, I suppose, to arrange to meet up with, again, love their coffees in these scenarios, but arrange to meet up for a coffee and a chat. And I think, like I said it there a minute ago, communication's your biggest help here. And if you're in a position where, you know, you're able to talk to each other and people are able to talk and be honest with each other, you'll be able to deal with a lot of stuff like this. Look at having a specific team of event volunteers that if Mary is sick or if she's late, she said, Patrick there, Mary could be, you know, she'd be under pressure and all the things in her life as well. And it mightn't be anything to do with the club. There could be other things going on and you don't know. So I saw there's a great club there. It's Nave Mornog in Dublin, and they have a group of retired, you know, retirees, and they're called Gale Force. And they come in, and it's like I couldn't believe it the first time I saw it. They just come in if there's a blitz on or if there's something on. They'll come in the morning and they'll set up all the goals and they'll go way back home again. And that's their volunteering done. So they're just event. I suppose you'd call them event volunteers, but they do a specific job, and that's the only job they do. Well, I don't know. Some of them might do more, but that's one of the only things they do in the club. And they call them. That's the club called them. They call them Gale Force. So I thought that was a really good idea, having specific people that are going to help out at specific things. And I'm sure we can all think of, you know, I'm sure we have lotto sellers, and that's maybe one of their only jobs in the club. So it's a bit like that there. If there is a social subcommittee or it's like a wee social committee that deals with that kind of stuff. If Mary, take her off the helper list, you know, if you're dealing with, you know, events and things like that there, if there are complaints, and explain why there. And I think that has to be a very, you know, sensitive discussion. And I suppose, because Mary obviously is doing a lot of good work for the club, so you don't want her to completely go the other way and not do anything again. So just say, look, we're giving you a bit of a break here again. If you have to have the conversation, arrange, you know, to have it, and, you know, and ask her, you know, is there anything wrong? Is she a bit annoyed? Is she annoyed with what she's doing in the club? And find out ways to support her. And I would develop a plan, and say, look, well, here's how we're going to support you in continuing to volunteer with the club. But I suppose, like, if we're in a situation where people don't want to volunteer at the same time as her, then you have to do something about that as well, and arrange to look up the role descriptions again and see what Mary's strengths are, and is there a role that that she'll fit into there. And then again, it's about that volunteers charter, and like the thing, like Mary, I'm reading that, and if Mary doesn't want to do things, like she's every right to as well, as a volunteer, she can say, look, well, I don't feel like doing this, or calling in sick, or it's not a job, it's not a, so make people all right. Maybe she's getting a bit annoyed because she's annoyed at having to say no, and she's annoyed about having to make excuses. So it's back to that volunteer charter and making people know they can say no, and they can have the day off and that kind of thing, if needed. And I suppose, just to sum up, the talk about that the aha moment, or when the light bulb moment there, when you avoid volunteer burnout, and your volunteers are satisfied, they're committed to the cause, they're more likely to go out and ask people to help, and they're honoured and they're happy to be volunteering with the club. And I think it's probably 90% of people that are, 99% maybe, of people that are involved in the club. When you have that, it leads to more retention of volunteers. The thing about volunteering, I suppose that's the other aha, is that they want it to be fun, they want it to be engaging, they don't want it to be like work. You'll find that maybe people have stresses in their life and they have other things, and it's back to John, that the volunteering and getting involved in the club can be the escape nearly. So the big thing is, make it a special opportunity. And the way I would say that is, if you give people a positive experience volunteering, and you make it as easy as possible for them to get involved, you give them all the resources, you give them all the support, and you make that first experience they have a good one, and you keep giving them that positive, they talk about that positive environment, they'll keep coming back, and you'll grow your volunteer resources. They talk about that. What that means is, you'll grow the number of people who want to help out, but if you have a pile of volunteers that are saying they're always under pressure and they're always under stress, and there's this to do and this to do and that to do, and they're sick of it, that's where you'll lose people, And the big thing I would, if you take anything from this, is, stop asking the same people. Keep an eye out for the Johns of the club, that he's not doing additional things without being asked, and look and try and broaden your horizons. Look to areas where maybe you haven't got volunteers before. Look to new families, new people that are involved in the club, new people that are coming into the I suppose the locality of the community, and go and ask them, And a couple of things just to remember from tonight is, look out for the signs, be aware, the signs of burnout, give people the positive opportunity for volunteering, communicate with them, and that includes listening to their grievances. So even we take Mary there, it might be having that chat and listening to maybe why Mary's complaining and why she's sick of it and why she, needs a break. And the big thing, again, if you're going to take it, if you utilize your club members and your officers and your volunteers correctly, they are the best thing about your club, the people, and it's the best thing about the association, and it's the best thing about Gaelic games, is the people involved. So if you utilize them right, there's no stopping where you can go as a club. If we have maybe any questions, or Claire, if you have any comments there, if not, thank you for your time tonight, guys. There, Claire.
I'm just reading Deborah's comment there from a few minutes ago, just sick of doing a lot of different roles, maybe obviously relating back to when you were going through the case study with Mary.
Yeah, I see Maria come in there just about the COVID guidelines, the extra courses in order for clubs to run could affect people also. I think, of course we don't mind Maria, sorry, I think that's a great point to come in. There is extra responsibility in people, this year. But unfortunately the COVID thing, it's one that we have to do, and that's, to get back in the pitch, that's what we have to do. And I know it is, it's a very easy thing. I suppose it's a very easy trap to fall into, to say, well, look, the manager, you could be the COVID officer, or the coach of that age group, or, the secretary can be the COVID officer. But we just have to remember that those people are doing a mountain of stuff already. So that could be back to where I think we mentioned there, you know, Deborah mentioned about the parents that maybe haven't got involved yet. That could be the way to you know, would you mind taking up this role? It'll be for 2 months, it'll be for 3 months, and this is what it entails. And I know that's not going to be just as easy as that, but that could be the way you could go about that. If we have no questions there, guys, I think we'll maybe leave it at that. And as I said there, thank you everyone for taking part. Stay safe and stay positive. I think we've got, you know, we've good news. We've got underage training coming back on Monday in the 26 counties, and we've just heard there in the 6 counties, you know, we're getting back to playing games in the near future as well. So look, as I said, stay safe, stay positive. Thank you everyone for taking part, and thank you, Claire, for being involved in this evening as well.
Thank you for having me.